He was screaming. Not shouting, screaming as his arm twisted behind him at an angle arms weren't meant to bend. Claire stood frozen in the living room of the Austen home, her designer heels sinking into the plush carpet, eyes wide with terror, as she watched the man she'd been sleeping with for 3 months, reduced to a whimpering mess on the floor. "You said she was weak," Claire yelled, her voice cracking with panic. "You said she wouldn't fight back." David couldn't answer. His jaw was already dislocated, hanging at an unnatural angle as blood trickled from the corner of his mouth. The sound coming from him wasn't even words anymore, just animalistic groans of pain mixed with shock. Naomi stood in front of them, 6 months pregnant, barefoot, her natural hair pulled back in a simple bun, the same woman they had mocked, dismissed, and humiliated for months. The same woman David had called harmless to his mistress's face. The same woman Claire had looked up and down with contempt just 15 minutes earlier. What neither of them understood was that silence is not surrender. Naomi had spent years learning control, years learning when not to strike, years learning that strength doesn't always need to announce itself, that the most dangerous people are often the quietest, that a warrior who has chosen peace is far more terrifying than someone who has never known restraint. And tonight, control was gone. "How long?" Naomi asked quietly, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "Do you mistake kindness for weakness before you meet consequences?" Claire backed away, her red dress suddenly feeling like a target, her confidence evaporating as she stumbled toward the front door. David tried to beg through his broken jaw, tried to form words that might save him, but nothing came out except pathetic sounds that made Claire's stomach turn. The woman they'd underestimated didn't look angry. She looked calm, and that was so much worse. To understand how a 6-month pregnant woman brought 2 confident adults to their knees without raising her voice, without breaking a sweat, without losing her breath, you have to go back to the version of Naomi before she chose peace over power, back to the woman she was before she met a man who believed that quiet meant weak, back to the fighter who had deliberately put away her weapons because she'd learned that true strength sometimes means choosing not to destroy someone, even when you could. David Ross had made a fatal miscalculation. He'd married a woman who could kill him with her bare hands and mistaken her decision not to for an inability to do so. Tonight, he would learn the difference. The charity wellness event at the Seattle Convention Center was exactly the kind of place David Ross normally avoided. Too many yoga mats, too much talk about mindful breathing, and way too many people who looked like they'd never closed a real deal in their lives. But his publicist had insisted. "You need softening," she'd said. "The press is calling you ruthless. Show them you care about something besides money." So David showed up in a $5,000 suit to a room full of people in athletic wear, signed a check with more zeros than most of the attendees made in a year, and prepared to leave within 20 minutes. Then he saw Naomi. She was at a booth demonstrating proper posture exercises to an elderly woman, her hands gentle as she adjusted the woman's shoulders, her voice warm and patient. She wore simple black leggings and a grey top, her natural hair in loose curls that fell past her shoulders. No makeup, no jewelry, nothing performative. She was beautiful in a way that didn't demand attention, which made David unable to look away. "That's Naomi Williams," someone told him when he asked. "Physical therapist. Volunteers here every year. She's good people." David approached after she finished with the elderly woman. "That was impressive," he said, flashing the smile that had closed deals from Manhattan to Los Angeles. Naomi looked up at him with warm brown eyes that held no recognition. "Thank you. Are you experiencing any pain or tension? I'm happy to show you some stretches." "I'm experiencing tension," David said, leaning slightly closer. "But I don't think stretches will fix it." Most women would have blushed or laughed. Naomi just looked at him with calm amusement. "Then I recommend a therapist. The psychological kind." David laughed, genuinely laughed, for the first time in months. "Can I at least buy you coffee?" "You can make a donation to the Wellness Fund," Naomi replied. "That's why you're here, isn't it?" "I already did. Big check. Very generous. Then your work here is done." She turned back to her materials, organizing pamphlets with the same careful attention she'd given the elderly woman. David Ross was not used to being dismissed. In his world, people orbited around him, investors, employees. Women. His name opened doors. His bank account opened more. But this woman at a wellness booth in Seattle was treating him like he was ordinary. He found it intoxicating. "Dinner then," he said. "One meal. If you hate me, I'll never bother you again." Naomi paused, studying him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Why? Why what? Why do you want to have dinner with me? You don't know me." David could have given her a dozen smooth answers, lines he'd used before, words designed to charm and seduce. Instead, something made him tell the truth. "Because you didn't recognize my name," he said quietly. "And I can't remember the last time someone looked at me like I was just a person." Naomi's expression softened slightly. "What's your name?" "David Ross." "Nice to meet you, David Ross." She extended her hand, and when he took it, her grip was surprisingly firm. "Naomi Williams. I finish here at 6. There's a Thai place 2 blocks away that doesn't care about your bank account." That dinner led to another, then another. Within a month, David was taking flights to Seattle between his New York and Chicago meetings, telling himself it was just a distraction, just something temporary. Naomi made him laugh. She called him on his bullshit when he tried to impress her with talk of his latest development project, a luxury high-rise in Lower Manhattan. She'd asked, "But where will the people who used to live there go?" No one had ever asked him that before. She told him about her work, about helping people recover from injuries, about the satisfaction of watching someone walk without pain after months of therapy. She told him about growing up in a working-class neighborhood in South Seattle, about her mother who'd cleaned houses and her father who'd worked at Boeing for 30 years. She told him about karate. "I started when I was 8, she explained one evening over dinner. "My dad's friend owned a dojo. He thought it would be good for discipline." "Are you any good?" David asked, amused by the image of quiet Naomi in a karate gi. "I was," she said. Then something flickered across her face, something David was too self-absorbed to notice. "I stopped competing at 26. Why? I learned what I needed to learn." She changed the subject before he could ask more. David proposed after 6 months. It was impulsive, probably too fast, but Naomi made him feel like a better version of himself. She didn't want his money. She'd insisted on keeping her job even after he suggested she didn't need to work. She didn't want the spotlight. She'd actually cringed when he mentioned introducing her to investors. She just wanted him, the real him, buried under years of ego and ambition. Or so he thought. They married at a small ceremony on Lake Washington, just family and close friends. Naomi wore a simple white dress and laughed when David's publicist tried to get them to do a magazine spread. "This is ours," Naomi said firmly, not content. David had loved that about her then, that quiet strength, that groundedness. He loved that she didn't need him to be David Ross, real estate mogul. She just needed him to be David. The problem was, as he would learn too late, David had forgotten how to be just David. He'd spent too many years building the mogul. And moguls don't have time for quiet wives who ask uncomfortable questions about displaced families and the human cost of development deals. The first year of marriage was good. David split his time between Seattle and his offices in New York, and when he was home, he was present. They took weekend trips to Portland, hiked in the Cascades, spent lazy Sunday mornings reading the paper at the kitchen table of their Capitol Hill apartment. Naomi continued her physical therapy work. David continued closing deals. It felt balanced. The shift came gradually, the way rot spreads through wood, invisible, until suddenly the whole structure is compromised. David's company, Ross Development Group, landed a massive contract to develop a mixed-use complex in downtown Chicago. It was the kind of project that would cement his reputation, the kind of deal that brought invitations to exclusive investor dinners and profiles in Forbes. Success tasted like champagne and power. "I need to spend more time in Chicago," he told Naomi over dinner one evening. "Maybe 3 weeks a month for the next 6 months. "That's a lot of time away," Naomi said carefully. "It's temporary. Once the project is established, I can delegate more." But the project didn't get delegated. It expanded. David started eyeing properties in Los Angeles, started taking meetings in Miami, started building an empire that demanded all of him. His phone became an extension of his hand. Dinners were interrupted by calls he had to take. Weekends became working time. When Naomi suggested they needed to reconnect, David said, "Once this deal closes." The deal closed. Another one opened. "I'm thinking we should move to Austin," David announced one evening. "Texas is booming. The opportunities there are insane. Lower taxes, business-friendly regulations. I have a job here," Naomi interrupted. "Patients who depend on me. You can find patients anywhere. This is about our future." "No," Naomi said quietly. "It's about your future. I'm just supposed to follow." David looked at her like she was being unreasonable. "I'm building something, Naomi. I thought you understood that." "I do understand it. I'm asking if you understand what I'm building too." The argument ended with David catching a red-eye to Los Angeles. When he returned 3 days later, he was distant, cold. He'd made a decision without her, and that decision was Austin. They moved 6 months later. The house was beautiful, a modern 4-bedroom in Westlake Hills with a view of the Greenbelt. David picked it without consulting her, just sent photos and said, "This is the one." Naomi left her patients, her practice, her community. She left the Pacific Northwest that had been her home for 30 years. She tried to build something new in Austin. She applied to practices, offered to volunteer at clinics. But David's schedule was relentless now. He was gone 4 days a week, sometimes 5. When he was home, he was on his laptop, distracted, somewhere between irritated and indifferent. Naomi started going to a dojo near their home, just to move, to feel centered, to remember who she was before she became David Ross's quiet wife. The sensei, an older black man named Marcus who'd been teaching for 40 years, watched her move through kata with sharp eyes. "You trained," he said, after her first session, "and not casually." "A long time ago," Naomi replied. "Muscle memory doesn't lie. You were good." "I was. Focused." Marcus studied her. "What happened?" "I hurt someone," Naomi said quietly. "Badly. In a tournament. He came at me wrong, and I reacted instinctively. He spent 2 weeks in the hospital. Accidents happen in competition. It wasn't an accident. I knew exactly what I was doing when I struck. I just didn't realize I still had that much anger inside me." She looked down at her hands. "So I stopped. Because I learned that having the skill to hurt people means you have to be very, very careful about when and why you use it." Marcus nodded slowly. "That's wisdom some people never learn. You're always welcome here, even if you just want to move. No sparring required." It became Naomi's sanctuary. 3 times a week, she'd go to the dojo, move through forms, remember what it felt like to be in her own body, to have control over something. David never asked where she went. He was too busy being important. Naomi found out she was pregnant on a Tuesday morning in March. She'd suspected for a week, but waited to take the test until she was sure. 3 tests later, all positive. She sat on the bathroom floor of their Austin home and cried. She wasn't sure if they were happy tears or terrified ones. David was in Miami. He'd been gone for 6 days, was supposed to return that evening. Naomi planned a small dinner, his favorite meal, thinking maybe this news would reset something between them. Maybe a baby would remind him what mattered. David's flight got delayed, then rescheduled, then cancelled. "I'll be home Friday," he said over the phone, barely audible over airport noise. "I need to talk to you about something," Naomi said. "Can it wait? I'm dealing with a crisis here. The Miami investors are getting cold feet. I'm pregnant." Silence, long enough that Naomi thought the call had dropped. "David, that's... wow. Okay, that's big news." His tone was flat, not happy, not excited, just processing. "Are you okay?" Naomi asked. Yes. Just let me get home and we'll talk, okay?" He didn't make it home Friday. He texted Saturday morning. "Flights are a nightmare. Probably Sunday night." He walked through the door Sunday at 11 p.m., exhausted and distracted. Naomi was waiting in the living room. "So," David said, dropping his bag. "Pregnant?" "Yes." "You're sure?" 3 tests. "And I made a doctor's appointment for next week." David nodded slowly, running his hand through his hair. "This is going to change everything. Yes, Naomi said quietly. It will. I mean with work. My schedule. I've got the LA project ramping up, and Chicago isn't done. And, David, Naomi's voice was soft but firm, I need you to hear what you just said. What? I told you I'm pregnant, and your first thought is about your work schedule. That's not fair. I'm just processing. This is unexpected. Is it? We're married. We've talked about having kids eventually. Eventually, David repeated. Not right now. Not when everything is finally taking off. The words landed like stones. Naomi felt something shift inside her, something that had been bending for months, finally starting to crack. So what are you saying? I'm saying the timing is terrible. There's never a perfect time for a baby, David. I know that. I'm just... He stopped, shook his head. I'm exhausted. Can we talk about this tomorrow? He went upstairs without kissing her goodnight. The next few weeks established a pattern that would define Naomi's entire pregnancy. David was absent. Not just physically, though. He was gone more than ever, but emotionally. When he was home, he was distant, distracted. He went to the first ultrasound because Naomi insisted, but spent half the appointment checking his phone. It's a critical meeting, he whispered when she glared at him. This is critical too, she whispered back. By month 4, David was barely home. The LA project was consuming him. He'd rented an apartment in Santa Monica, temporarily, and was spending 2 weeks a month there. Naomi was alone in Austin, her body changing, her emotions raw, dealing with morning sickness and fatigue, and the profound loneliness of carrying a child with a partner who seemed to view the pregnancy as an inconvenience. She went to the dojo more often. Marcus noticed the pregnancy immediately. Congratulations, he said warmly. When are you due? October. Your husband must be thrilled. Naomi's face must have given her away, because Marcus's expression softened. Ah, he said quietly. Like that. He's just busy. Building a business. It's demanding. So is growing a human. Naomi laughed, but it came out hollow. Yeah, you know, Marcus said carefully. I've been teaching for 40 years. I've seen a lot of people use martial arts to process difficult situations. Some people think fighting is about hurting others, but real martial arts is about knowing yourself, your limits, your triggers, your power. I remember, Naomi said. Do you? Because you're carrying yourself like someone who's forgotten how strong she is. Naomi looked at him, surprised by the directness. I'm not saying you should fight your husband, Marcus continued. I'm saying you shouldn't shrink yourself to make his neglect easier. Strength isn't just physical. It's knowing what you will and won't accept. The words stayed with Naomi. By month 5, she'd stopped expecting David to call, stopped waiting for him to ask how she was feeling, stopped pretending his absence was temporary. She focused on the baby, prepared the nursery herself, read parenting books, went to prenatal appointments alone, and something else happened. The anger she'd buried for years, the anger she'd learned to control so carefully after the tournament incident started to simmer again. Not wildly, not dangerously, but it was there, a steady heat building beneath her quiet surface. David was in Los Angeles when he met Claire Bennett. Claire Bennett was everything David thought he wanted. She was loud where Naomi was quiet, aggressive where Naomi was gentle, ambitious where Naomi was content. She wore power suits and red lipstick and walked into rooms like she owned them. She was a commercial real estate broker. David's firm hired to help close the Los Angeles deal. Smart, connected, ruthless. She reminded David of himself. Their first meeting was professional. Their second was flirtatious. By the third, they were having drinks after work at a rooftop bar in downtown LA. The city sprawling below them like a promise. Your wife must hate how much you travel, Claire said, swirling her martini. She's understanding, David replied. That's code for she's given up. David laughed, but it felt hollow. She's pregnant, actually. Due in October. Claire's eyebrows raised. Congratulations. Thanks. You don't sound thrilled. David shrugged. Timing isn't great. There's never a perfect time for kids, Claire said. Then she leaned closer. But there's always a perfect time for recognizing when you're with the wrong person. It should have been a red flag, a moment to pull back, to go home, to remember his vows. Instead, David kissed her. The affair started that night. David told himself it wasn't serious, just stress relief, just something temporary. Naomi was pregnant and emotional and not interested in sex anyway. Claire was available and exciting and made him feel like the man he was before marriage softened him. He told himself he'd end it soon. He didn't. By month 6 of Naomi's pregnancy, David was spending 3 weeks out of every month in Los Angeles with Claire. They weren't careful. They went to restaurants, attended events together. David told people she was his business partner, which was technically true. Claire knew about Naomi. David had told her early on, framing his marriage as a mistake, a moment of weakness when he'd confused comfort with love. "She's not like us," David explained over dinner one evening. "She doesn't understand ambition. She's content with small things, a quiet life." "So why'd you marry her?" Claire asked. "Because I thought that's what I wanted. Peace. Simplicity. But peace is just another word for boring." Claire smiled. "And what am I?" "Exciting," David said, taking her hand. "You remind me who I am." What David didn't tell Claire, what he'd stopped thinking about himself, was that he'd fallen in love with Naomi precisely because she was different, because she'd grounded him, because she'd seen past the performance to something real. But that version of David was gone now. The man sitting across from Claire was all performance. One evening in late August, after several glasses of wine, Claire asked the question that would change everything. "Why don't you just leave her?" David paused. "It's complicated. She's pregnant. I get it. But you're not happy. She's not equipped to handle divorce right now. She's fragile." Claire laughed. "Fragile? Or just inconvenient?" "I'm serious. Naomi is. She's soft. Sweet. She wouldn't survive confrontation. She'd just collapse. So you're staying out of pity, out of decency." Claire studied him. "You know what I think? I think you're scared to leave because you need someone to play the role of the good wife at home while you do whatever you want out here." "That's not—" "It's fine," Claire interrupted. "I'm not asking you to marry me, but at least be honest about what you're doing." David didn't like hearing it said out loud, but he didn't disagree. He returned to Austin the next day, feeling guilty and defensive. Naomi was in the kitchen when he arrived, visibly pregnant now, moving slowly as she prepared ginger tea. She looked up when he entered. "You're home early." Wrapped up the meetings faster than expected. "How'd they go?" "Good. Fine." David set down his bag, suddenly uncomfortable in his own home. "You're getting big." "That's what happens when you're 6 months pregnant," Naomi said dryly. "I didn't mean—" "I know what you meant." She turned back to her tea. David felt a flash of irritation. She was always so calm, so controlled, never yelling, never demanding, never giving him a reason to justify his anger. It would be easier if she'd just fight with him. "I have to go back to LA next week," he said. "Big presentation." "Of course you do." "Naomi, I'm not fighting with you, David. Do what you need to do." Her acceptance felt like accusation. He went upstairs without another word. "In Los Angeles?" Claire asked again. "When do I get to meet the wife? See what I'm competing with?" David laughed. "You're not competing. There's no contest. Then prove it." "How?" Claire's eyes glinted with something dangerous. "Bring me to Austin. Let me see your life there. If it's really over, if she's really as weak as you say, then it should be easy." David should have said no, should have recognized the cruelty in Claire's request, should have understood that bringing his mistress into his home while his pregnant wife was there was crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Instead, he said, "Fine. Next trip, I'll bring you to Austin," because somewhere deep inside, a part of David wanted to hurt Naomi, wanted to punish her for being what he'd once loved, quiet, kind, grounded, wanted to prove to himself that leaving her would be justified. He didn't realize he was about to learn what mercy looked like, and what happened when mercy ran out. David brought Claire to Austin on a Thursday in early September. He didn't tell Naomi, didn't warn her, just texted that he was coming home and bringing a colleague to discuss business. Naomi was 7 months pregnant now. Her feet were swollen. Her back ached constantly. She'd spent the morning at yet another prenatal appointment alone, where the doctor had reminded her to reduce stress. She laughed bitterly at that. Stress was her husband's absence. Stress was preparing a nursery by herself. Stress was lying awake at night wondering if David would even be present for the birth. She was barefoot in the kitchen when she heard the front door open, wearing a loose cotton dress and trying to manage the nausea that still plagued her despite being in the 3rd trimester. "I'm in here," she called out, stirring honey into ginger tea. David walked in, and behind him, a woman in a blood-red dress and heels, a woman with sharp eyes and a sharper smile, a woman who looked at Naomi the way someone looks at a problem they're about to solve. "Naomi," David said casually, "this is Claire Bennett. She's been helping with the LA project." Naomi's hand stilled on the spoon. She looked at David, then at Claire, then back at David. She knew, in that instant, with a clarity that only comes from months of intuition finally confirmed, Naomi knew exactly who Claire was and exactly what David had done. "Nice to meet you," Naomi said quietly, her voice steady despite the adrenaline starting to course through her veins. Claire extended a perfectly manicured hand. "David's told me so much about you." Naomi didn't take the hand. She looked at David. "Can I speak with you privately?" "We're about to go over some documents," David said, setting his laptop bag on the kitchen table. "It'll just take an hour." "David." Naomi's voice was still quiet, but something in it made Claire step back slightly. "Kitchen. Now." David sighed like she was being unreasonable. "Fine. Claire, make yourself comfortable in the living room." Claire smiled and walked away, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. In the kitchen, Naomi spoke in a low, controlled voice. "What are you doing?" "What do you mean?" "You brought another woman into our home. A colleague. I told you. Don't." Naomi's eyes were hard. "Don't insult me by lying right now. I know who she is." David's jaw tightened. "You're being paranoid." "Am I? Or am I finally paying attention?" "Naomi, you're pregnant and emotional. You're reading into things that aren't there." It was such a classic move, making her doubt her own perception, framing her legitimate anger as hormonal instability. "Get her out," Naomi said. "We have work to do." "Then do it somewhere else. Not in our home." David's expression shifted to something colder. "This is my home too. I pay for it. I'll conduct business here if I want to." The words hung between them. Naomi felt that crack inside her widen, not into rage yet, but into something crystalline and sharp. "Is that how you see this?" she asked quietly. "You pay for it, so you make the rules. That's not what I... Get her out." "No." They stared at each other. Years of marriage, years of compromise, years of Naomi swallowing her voice to keep the peace, all of it burning away in a single moment. "Then I'm leaving," Naomi said. She walked out of the kitchen, grabbed her keys from the hallway table, and headed for the door. Claire was in the living room, scrolling through her phone, completely comfortable in another woman's home. She looked up as Naomi passed. "Everything okay?" Naomi paused, turned, looked at this woman, this intruder who'd asked that question with such casual cruelty. "You should leave," Naomi said quietly. Claire smiled. "David invited me. I'm staying." "I'm asking you to leave, and I'm declining." Claire stood, walking closer. She was tall in her heels, looking down at Naomi's swollen belly with something like pity. "Look, I know this is uncomfortable, but David and I have important work to discuss." "Is that what you call it?" Claire's smile widened. "Oh, honey, you know exactly what this is. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" Naomi felt her hands clench, felt muscle memory from 1,000 training sessions flood her nervous system, felt that anger, the anger she'd learned to control so carefully, start to rise. She closed her eyes, breathed, opened them again. "I'm leaving," she said. "But you should know this isn't over." Claire laughed. "What are you going to do? You can barely walk. You think David's scared of you?" "No," Naomi said quietly. "He's not. That's his mistake." She walked out, got in her car, and drove to the dojo. Marcus was teaching a youth class when she arrived. He took one look at her face and called for a break. "What happened?" he asked gently. Naomi told him. About David, about Claire, about the disrespect, the cruelty, the years of neglect, culminating in this moment of public humiliation. What do you need? Marcus asked when she finished. I need to move, Naomi said. I need to remember who I am. You're 7 months pregnant. I know my limits. I just need to move through forms. Slowly. Just to feel in control of something. Marcus studied her, then nodded. Okay, but carefully. And you stop if anything feels wrong. Naomi moved through kata for an hour. Slow, controlled movements. Nothing aggressive, nothing risky. Just the familiar patterns that reminded her body what it was capable of. When she finished, she felt centered again. Clear. She drove home. David and Claire were still there. They'd moved to the living room. Documents spread across the coffee table. Wine glasses in hand. In Naomi's home. At her coffee table. Drinking her wine. You're back, David said when she entered. Not an apology. Just a statement. Naomi looked at both of them. I need you both to understand something, she said quietly. This ends now. Claire laughed. Or what? Or I make it end. David stood up. Irritated now. Naomi, stop being dramatic. We're working. She leaves. Or I call a lawyer tomorrow and you lose everything. That got David's attention. You're threatening me. I'm telling you the consequences of your choices. You can't afford a lawyer. I'll find a way. Claire stood too, emboldened by wine and David's protection. This is sad, she said. You clinging to a man who doesn't want you anymore. Who's moved on. She walked toward Naomi, getting close enough that Naomi could smell her perfume. You're weak, Claire said. David told me. Soft, fragile. You won't fight because you can't. So why don't you just... Claire reached out to pat Naomi's shoulder, a gesture of dismissive condescension. She never made contact. Naomi moved. Not a strike. Just a deflection. Her hand intercepted Claire's wrist mid-motion, applied pressure to a specific point, and redirected her arm down and away in a movement so smooth it looked choreographed. Claire gasped and stumbled backward, her wrist throbbing where Naomi had pressed. Don't touch me, Naomi said quietly. The room went silent. David stared at his wife like he was seeing her for the first time. Claire cradled her wrist, shock replacing her smug confidence. You should leave now, Naomi said to Claire. While you still can. Did you just threaten me? Claire's voice was shrill now, all the sophistication gone. No, I gave you information. What you do with it is your choice. David finally found his voice. Naomi, what the hell? Shut up, David. Naomi didn't raise her voice. Didn't need to. You've said enough. For months. You've made your choices clear. Now, I'm making mine clear. She leaves. Tonight. And tomorrow. We have a very different conversation about this marriage. You can't tell me. I just did. Something in Naomi's tone must have finally registered because David stopped talking. Claire grabbed her purse. You're insane, she hissed at Naomi. Then to David. Are you coming? David looked between them. His pregnant wife, still barefoot, still calm. His mistress, rattled and scared. He chose wrong. Let me just drive you to your hotel, he said to Claire. Naomi watched them leave together. She stood in her living room, alone, and felt something inside her finally break completely. Not into rage, not into despair, into clarity. She knew what was coming. Knew David would push this further. Knew Claire wouldn't let this go. And when they came back, when they inevitably tested her again, mercy would be over. David didn't come home that night. Naomi didn't sleep. She sat in the nursery she'd prepared alone, surrounded by tiny clothes and soft blankets, and thought about the future. She thought about raising a child with a man who'd betrayed her. She thought about teaching her daughter or son about dignity while staying in an undignified marriage. She thought about what strength actually meant. Her phone buzzed at 2 a.m. A text from David. We need to talk. Coming by in the morning. No apology. No explanation. Just a demand to talk. Naomi didn't respond. David arrived at 10 with Claire beside him. Naomi was in the kitchen when they walked in. She'd been awake for 28 hours, running on adrenaline and clarity. What is she doing here? Naomi asked calmly. We've decided to be honest, David said, his voice carrying a false confidence, about where things stand. How considerate. Claire stepped forward, emboldened by David's presence and last night's wine. Look, this doesn't have to be ugly. David's willing to provide for you and the baby. A generous settlement, a house, support. But you need to accept reality. It's over. Naomi looked at David. You're doing this while I'm 7 months pregnant. The timing isn't ideal. The timing is sadistic. Don't be dramatic, Claire interrupted. Women raise babies alone all the time. You'll manage. You're in my home, Naomi said quietly, speaking to me about my marriage and my baby. In my home. It's David's home too, Claire shot back. David said nothing, just stood there, letting Claire fight his battles, hiding behind her aggression while maintaining plausible deniability. Naomi felt the anger crystallize into something cold and precise. Get out, she said. We're not done talking, David replied. Yes, we are. Claire laughed. You really think you're in control here? You're 7 months pregnant, unemployed, living in a house he pays for. What exactly is your leverage? This is your last chance, Naomi said, looking directly at David now. Tell her to leave. We handle this privately, between us. Stop giving orders, David snapped, his frustration finally showing. You don't get to control this situation. David, Naomi said softly. I'm warning you. Warn me? David laughed bitterly. What are you going to do, Naomi? Cry? Call your mother? You've never stood up for yourself in your life. You just accept things and move on because that's who you are. Weak. Passive. Claire smiled triumphantly. See? Even he knows it. They'd pushed too far. Naomi knew they'd pushed too far because her body had gone still in a way it only did when violence was imminent, because the anger that had been building for months had finally reached critical mass, because the control she'd maintained for years, the deliberate choice not to hurt people even when she could, was about to evaporate. Get her out of my house, Naomi said one final time. Claire took a step toward her. Or what? She reached out not to touch Naomi's shoulder this time, but to push her, to physically move her aside as if she were an obstacle. The moment Claire's hand made contact with Naomi's chest, everything changed. Naomi's hand shot up, intercepting Claire's wrist with precision. She twisted, applied pressure to the joint, and used Claire's forward momentum against her. Claire stumbled, crying out in pain as Naomi's grip tightened. What are you? Claire tried to pull away. Naomi didn't let go. She looked at David. This ends now. Either you remove her, or I do. David stepped forward, his face red with anger. Let her go. Make me. It was a challenge. A line crossed. David grabbed Naomi's free arm, trying to pull her away from Claire. It was the worst mistake of his life, because David had never actually seen his wife fight, had never witnessed what years of martial arts training looked like when control was removed, had never understood that the quiet woman he'd married could end him in seconds if she chose to. Naomi released Claire and pivoted, redirecting David's momentum using his own force against him. She dropped her center of gravity, pregnancy and all, and used a hip throw variation that sent David stumbling backward over the coffee table. He crashed into it, glass and wood clattering, his phone skidding across the floor. Claire screamed. David groaned, stunned, and Naomi stood there 7 months pregnant, barefoot, breathing steady, looking at both of them with absolute clarity. I told you, she said quietly. I warned you both. Claire was backing toward the door, cradling her wrist. David was trying to stand, his back aching from the fall, his pride shattered more than his body. You're crazy, Claire shouted. You assaulted us. We'll call the police. Do it, Naomi said calmly. Call them. Tell them you broke into my home, threatened a pregnant woman, and put your hands on her first. See how that goes. Claire looked at David. Do something. But David was staring at Naomi like he'd never seen her before, because he hadn't. He'd seen the version of Naomi who chose peace, who chose patience, who chose mercy. He'd never met the version who chose otherwise. Leave, Naomi said. Both of you. Now. This is my house, David shouted, finding his voice again. No, Naomi said. It's our house, and I'm invoking my right to feel safe in it. You brought a hostile person into our home. You allowed her to threaten me. You put your hands on me. Any lawyer in Texas will back me up. So either you both leave now, or I call the police and let them sort it out. David looked at Claire, back at Naomi. He was calculating, weighing options, trying to regain control of a situation that had slipped through his fingers. We're leaving, he finally said. But this isn't over. Yes, Naomi replied quietly. It is. They left. Naomi locked the door behind them, then went to the nursery and sat on the floor, her heart pounding, her hands shaking with adrenaline. She'd crossed her own line, used her training in anger, hurt people, but unlike the tournament years ago, this time, she didn't feel guilt. She felt free. David took Claire to a hotel downtown. She spent the entire drive ranting about Naomi's psychotic behavior, demanding David press charges, insisting they'd been assaulted. David said nothing. He was too busy replaying what he'd witnessed in his living room. The speed, the precision, the complete control. His wife, his quiet, gentle wife, had moved like someone who'd spent years preparing for exactly that moment. "Why didn't you tell me she knew karate?" Claire demanded once they reached her hotel room. "I didn't think it mattered," David said absently. "She said she stopped competing years ago." "Competed?" Claire's voice went shrill. "What do you mean? Competed? Like tournaments?" "I guess. I never asked." Claire stared at him. "So you brought me into the home of a woman with martial arts training, told me she was weak and fragile, and now I have bruises on my wrist. She hurt you." David looked at Claire's arm. There were indeed bruises forming where Naomi had gripped her pressure point marks that would darken over the next day. "Of course she hurt me. Did you see what she did?" David had seen. He'd felt it too, the way Naomi had used his own momentum to throw him, the way she'd maintained balance despite being 7 months pregnant, the way her movements had been economical and devastatingly effective. He pulled out his phone and searched. Naomi Williams Karate, Seattle. What came up made his stomach drop. Articles from 8 years ago. Tournament results. Photos of a younger Naomi, in a karate gi, holding trophies, her face focused and fierce. Pacific Northwest Regional Champion. Women's Division. Williams advances to national tournament. Controversy at Seattle Invitational. Competitor hospitalized. David clicked on the last article. Read about a match that had ended with Naomi's opponent in the hospital for 2 weeks. Read how witnesses described the strike as controlled but devastating. Read how Naomi had withdrawn from competition immediately afterward, citing personal reasons. "Oh my God," David whispered. "What?" Claire demanded. He showed her the phone, showed her the articles, showed her the woman he'd married, and completely misunderstood. Claire's face went pale. "She could have killed us." "No," David said slowly, a terrible realization dawning. "She could have killed us, but she didn't. What she did was restrained. Restrained. She threw you through a coffee table. She used enough force to stop me, not enough to seriously hurt me." David looked at his hands, remembering the feeling of being completely outmatched. "If she'd wanted to hurt us, we'd be in the hospital right now." Claire was pacing now, her earlier confidence completely gone. "What do we do?" "We leave her alone." "What?" "No. She assaulted us. We have witnesses." "We don't have witnesses. And if we call the police, I have to explain why I brought you into my pregnant wife's home. Have to explain that you pushed her first. Have to deal with lawyers who will make me look like the villain I actually am in this situation. So we just let her win." David looked at Claire, really looked at her, and realized something profound. This woman wasn't his future. She was just his ego, reflected back at him. She was everything he thought he wanted. Aggressive, ambitious, uncompromising, and she was completely wrong. "Yeah," David said quietly. "We let her win." "You're pathetic," Claire spat. "Probably. But I'm also smart enough to know when I've lost." Claire grabbed her things and stormed out, muttering about finding someone with an actual backbone. David let her go. He sat alone in that hotel room for hours, scrolling through articles about his wife, looking at photos of a younger Naomi, whose eyes held fire instead of patience. He'd married that fire and spent 2 years slowly extinguishing it with neglect and disrespect. He'd mistaken her choice for peace as evidence of weakness. He'd brought another woman into her home and expected her to just accept it. What an idiot he'd been. David returned home 3 days later, alone. He'd given Naomi space, time to calm down, hoping they could have a rational conversation. He found the locks changed. A note was taped to the door. "Your belongings are in the garage. My lawyer will contact yours next week. Naomi." David called her. She didn't answer. He called again and again. Finally, on the 10th call, she picked up. "I'm sorry," David said immediately. "Naomi, I'm so sorry. I was wrong. About everything. Can we please talk?" "There's nothing to talk about," Naomi replied, her voice calm and final. "You made your choices. Now I'm making mine. I ended things with Claire. It's over. It was a mistake. The affair was a mistake. Bringing her into our home was a choice. Allowing her to threaten me was a choice. Putting your hands on me was a choice. I'm done pretending these are accidents, David. I love you." "No," Naomi said quietly. "You love the idea of me. The version who made you feel like a good person without demanding you actually be one. But I'm done being that version. I'm done shrinking myself so you feel bigger. What about the baby? Our child deserves both parents. Our child deserves a mother who knows her worth and a father who has to earn his place in their life. You're welcome to try. But you'll do it from a distance, until you figure out how to be a decent human being. Naomi, please." She hung up. David stood on the porch of the home he'd purchased but never really lived in, holding a phone that had just delivered his wife's verdict. He'd lost her, not in the dramatic way he'd imagined when he started the affair, not in a screaming match or a tearful confrontation. He'd lost her the way empires fall slowly, through accumulated small destructions, until one day the foundation crumbles completely. The divorce proceedings were swift and brutal. Naomi hired Margaret Hoffman, a family lawyer in Austin, known for 2 things: compassion for wronged spouses and absolutely no tolerance for men who claimed their infidelity was somehow complicated or excusable. Margaret took one look at the timeline: pregnant wife, affair, mistress, brought into the marital home, physical confrontation, and smiled the kind of smile that made David's lawyer nervous. "Texas is a community property state," Margaret explained to Naomi during their first meeting, "which means you're entitled to half of everything acquired during the marriage. His business grew significantly while you were together, didn't it?" "Yes," Naomi confirmed. "His company tripled in value, and you supported that growth by relocating for him, giving up your career, managing his household." "I did." "Then we're not just asking for child support and alimony. We're asking for your fair share of what you helped build." David's lawyer pushed back hard. They argued Naomi hadn't contributed financially, that the business was David's alone, that she was being vindictive. Margaret responded with a detailed account of every sacrifice Naomi had made: the career she'd abandoned in Seattle, the patients she'd left behind, the community she'd lost, the pregnancy she'd managed alone while David built his empire on the foundation of her quiet support. She wasn't his employee, Margaret stated in mediation. She was his partner, and partnerships get equity. The settlement took 3 months to finalize. Naomi got the Austin house, full custody, with David granted supervised visitation until he could prove stability, substantial child support, and 40% of the company's value, enough to make David's accountant wince. But the financial consequences weren't the worst part for David. The social consequences destroyed him. Word spread quickly through Austin's business community about what had happened. Not the sanitized version David tried to tell, but the real one leaked by hotel staff who'd heard Claire ranting, confirmed by neighbors who'd witnessed the scene, amplified by Margaret's legal filings, which were public record. David Ross, successful developer, had cheated on his pregnant wife, had brought his mistress into their home, had gotten physically aggressive with his wife, and been humiliated when she defended herself. The story was too good not to share. Investors started pulling out. Not overtly, they claimed it was about market conditions, about shifting priorities. But David knew the truth. No one wanted to be associated with him now. His reputation as a ruthless businessman had been an asset when paired with presumed integrity. Now, he was just seen as cruel. Deals fell through. Partners distanced themselves. Invitations dried up. Claire disappeared completely. Blocked his number. Refused to testify or be involved in the divorce proceedings. She'd moved on to another wealthy target, likely telling everyone she'd barely known David at all. By October, David was alone in a rented condo in downtown Austin, watching his empire slowly crumble, while his pregnant wife prepared to give birth without him. He tried to reach out to Naomi multiple times. She never responded directly but communicated through her lawyer. He could attend the birth if he followed strict conditions. He'd wait in the waiting room. He would not enter the delivery room unless explicitly invited. He would leave when asked. David agreed to everything. Naomi went into labor on October 18th at 3 a.m. Marcus drove her to the hospital, the sensei who'd become more of a father figure than David had ever been a husband. He'd been teaching Naomi modified kata throughout her third trimester, helping her stay centered and strong. David arrived at the hospital at 6 a.m., looking haggard and desperate. Marcus met him in the waiting room. "She's doing great," he said. "Strong as hell." "Can I see her?" David asked. She said no, but she'll let you know when the baby comes. David sat in that waiting room for 11 hours. He watched families come and go, watched fathers hold newborns, watched wives lean on husbands. He'd thrown all of that away for excitement, for ego, for a woman who disappeared the moment things got complicated. At 5:47 p.m., Marcus emerged. "You have a daughter," he said. "Healthy, beautiful. Naomi's tired, but okay. Can I see them?" "Naomi says you have 10 minutes. Don't waste them." David walked into the hospital room with shaking hands. Naomi was propped up in bed, looking exhausted and radiant. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in pink blankets, their daughter, with a full head of dark hair and Naomi's nose. "Meet your daughter," Naomi said quietly. "Her name is Grace." "Grace," David repeated, his voice breaking. "She's perfect." "Yes, she is. Naomi. David." Her voice was firm but not cruel. "You have 10 minutes with your daughter. Don't spend them apologizing to me. That doesn't matter right now." David approached the bed carefully. Naomi shifted slightly, allowing him to see Grace more clearly. She was so small, so fragile, so completely innocent of her father's mistakes. "Can I hold her?" David asked. Naomi hesitated, then nodded. David took his daughter in his arms and felt something inside him break completely. Not the break that had led to his affair, not the break that had made him cruel. A different kind of break, the kind that tears down what's rotten so something new might grow. "I'm going to be better," he whispered to Grace. "I'm going to earn the right to be your dad. I promise." Grace made a small sound. David's tears fell on the pink blanket. Naomi watched him cry and felt nothing. No pity, no satisfaction, just a calm certainty that she'd made the right choice. "Your 10 minutes are up," she said gently. David kissed Grace's forehead and handed her back to Naomi. "Thank you," he said, "for letting me meet her." "You're welcome. Can I come back tomorrow?" "Through the lawyer. We'll set up a schedule." David nodded and left. Marcus returned, carrying coffee. "How do you feel?" he asked Naomi. "Strong," she replied, looking down at Grace. "I feel strong." 6 months later, Naomi stood in front of a class of 12 women at Marcus's dojo. Grace was with a babysitter, a kind older woman from Naomi's neighborhood who loved babies and asked no questions about Grace's father's absence. The women in front of Naomi ranged from their 20s to their 60s. Different backgrounds, different stories, but all of them had signed up for the same class. Self-defense for survivors. "I'm not here to teach you how to fight," Naomi said as she began the first session. "I'm here to teach you that you already know how. That strength isn't about size or aggression. It's about understanding your body, understanding your limits, and understanding when those limits are negotiable." She'd been teaching for 3 months now. Marcus had offered her a position, after watching how she'd handled everything. The pregnancy, the divorce, the transformation from invisible to undeniable. People will underestimate you, Naomi continued. They'll mistake kindness for weakness, quiet for passive, patience for acceptance. Your job is to let them learn the difference on your terms, not theirs. The women nodded. Some had left abusive relationships. Some were preparing to. Some just wanted to feel safe in their own bodies. Naomi taught them not just techniques, but philosophy. The same lessons she'd learned years ago and forgotten until David forced her to remember. That mercy is a choice, not a weakness. That walking away is often the strongest move. That sometimes, the people who need to learn respect will only learn it through consequences. David had been granted supervised visitation, 1 afternoon a week, 3 hours at a time, with a court-appointed monitor present. He showed up on time every week, brought appropriate toys, tried his best to be present. Naomi gave him credit for that. She didn't forgive him. Forgiveness wasn't required or even desired. But she acknowledged his effort. His business had stabilized at a smaller scale. He'd sold off some projects, downsized his ambitions. He was no longer the rising mogul, just a developer trying to rebuild his reputation one honest deal at a time. He'd reached out through the lawyer once, asking if they could talk, really talk about what had happened. Naomi declined. There's nothing to talk about, she'd replied through Margaret. We're co-parents. That's all we need to be. David accepted it. What choice did he have? On Grace's first birthday, Naomi threw a small party at their home, the home that was fully hers, now painted in colors she'd chosen, decorated with photos she'd taken, filled with friends she'd made through the dojo, and her new physical therapy practice. Marcus came, other students from the dojo, neighbors, people who'd supported her through the hardest year of her life. David was invited for 1 hour. He brought an elaborate birthday gift, too elaborate, overcompensating, and took photos with Grace. At the end of his hour, he approached Naomi. Thank you for letting me be here, he said. You're her father. You get to be part of her life. I know I don't deserve. David. Naomi's voice was kind but firm. Stop apologizing. It doesn't change anything. Just be a good father going forward. That's what matters. He nodded and left. After the party, after everyone had gone home, Naomi sat in Grace's nursery and watched her daughter sleep. She thought about the woman she'd been 2 years ago, the woman who'd shrunk herself to fit a man's vision of peace, the woman who'd forgotten that strength wasn't just physical, it was knowing what you would and wouldn't accept. She thought about that night in the living room when she'd finally stopped accepting. Some people criticized her for what she'd done, called it excessive, said she should have been more understanding, more forgiving. But those people didn't understand. Violence isn't always physical. David had been violent with neglect, with disrespect, with cruelty disguised as indifference. He'd brought violence into her home in the form of a woman who'd mocked her while she was carrying his child. Naomi had simply responded in the only language they'd understand. She didn't regret it. Grace stirred in her sleep, making small baby sounds. Naomi reached into the crib and gently rubbed her daughter's back. I'm going to teach you something, she whispered. I'm going to teach you that being kind doesn't mean being a doormat, that being strong doesn't mean being cruel, that you can choose peace without choosing powerlessness. Grace settled back into sleep. Naomi stood and walked to her own bedroom, the bedroom she no longer shared, the space that was entirely her own. She looked at herself in the mirror, saw the scar above her left rib from a training accident years ago, saw the stretch marks from pregnancy, saw the woman who'd rebuilt herself from quiet wife to complete person. In the corner of the room sat her karate gi freshly pressed, ready for tomorrow's class. Naomi smiled. Strength, she'd learned, wasn't about never needing anyone. It was about never needing anyone who diminished you. It was about building a life where your value wasn't determined by someone else's perception. It was about teaching your daughter through action, not words, that she deserved to take up space in the world. David Ross had mistaken silence for surrender. It was the last mistake he'd ever make with Naomi. And every woman who walked through the doors of Marcus's dojo, who learned to stand differently, to speak differently, to exist differently, in a world that tried to make them small, They carried forward the lesson Naomi had learned the hard way, that the quiet ones are often the most dangerous, not because they want violence, but because when they finally choose it, they've already exhausted every other option, and they don't miss. The end.